Who would not want to be there when the Donald meets Rocket Man? The leaders of the US and North Korea could be planning a sit-down about weapons of mass destruction. Some people, though, are just waiting for the fireworks. This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. If it happens, it will be history in the making, but it is a big if. Whether anything's achieved is another matter, but there's talk. The talks about talks have been taking place. Given the volatility of the two leaders, maybe that's as far as it will get. Who knows? Well, I hope that's a question we're able to tackle.
The North Korean nuclear program. It has confounded US administrations for decades and remains the largest obstacle to peace on the Korean peninsula. But the Trump White House is claiming to have made a breakthrough after the North signaled it might be willing to talk face to face. Could such a meeting be the first step to a lasting peace? North Korea has conducted 6 suspected nuclear tests in the last 12 years. And the country has been steadily improving its long-range missile capability. Its latest test missile flew 1,000 kilometers east into the Sea of Japan. It's believed to be able to reach Washington and the rest of the continental United States. Donald Trump's approach is unlike any previous US president.
Twisted dictatorship, depraved regime. They will be met with fire and fury. We can't have madmen out there shooting rockets all over the place.
But there are concerns that any talks could be taken out of the hands of experienced diplomats as the Trump team talk up the merits of his deal-making abilities.
President Trump is one of the best negotiators, great confidence in his ability. Glad that he'll be the one at the table for the United States.
And skeptics are worried that the Kim government will use a US-North Korea summit as an opportunity to legitimize the regime. For now, Trump's approach to the DPRK has softened, offering to meet for talks without concrete assurances regarding denuclearization, something Barack Obama was criticized for even suggesting in 2008. And while these kinds of talks would fly in the face of decades of hawkish Republican policy on North Korea, being able to paint Trump as peacemaker is a useful distraction. At home, the Trump White House is engulfed in controversy, as Trump himself is sued by an adult film star and inquiries into Russian election meddling inch closer to the president. Talks could happen as soon as May, providing both sides agree to terms. It could be a meaningful step toward nuclear disarmament on the Korean peninsula, or another in a long line of US disappointments. For now at least, it's being framed by the White House as a win, and one which this administration desperately needs.
Joining us via Skype from Busan in South Korea, we have Robert Kelly, an American political analyst specialising in inter-Korean affairs. From Washington, D.C., Julian Borger joins us. He's the Guardian's World Affairs editor. With me at the round table, Lindsay Newman, US political analyst, and James Hoare, historian and former diplomat who helped to establish the British Embassy in North Korea. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's go to the United States and to South Korea first in this programme, and to you, Robert, in South Korea. Are the people of that country excited or perhaps terrified at the prospect of this?
I think there's a lot of excitement for the summit between President Moon and Kim Jong-un, the one that's supposed to come in about 6 weeks. I think there's a lot of anxiety about the one between Trump and Kim because Trump is such a wild card. He's very unpopular here. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
The relationship between the two Koreas, North and South, appears to be warming a little bit. What are the expectations of that?
Yeah, I think there's sort of that things have gotten a lot better since the Olympics. It seems to be. I think the South Koreans are looking for some kind of deal on nuclear weapons ultimately. I think they'll be willing to accept less. I think the president of South Korea is sort of itching for a deal, and he'd probably give up a fair amount to get a decent takeaway. But I mean, ultimately, I think what the South Koreans want, if you read the papers, certainly the conservative press is holding the president's feet to the fire. There's got to be some movement on nuclear weapons, right? Without that, it's going to be hard to push for other things like human rights and economic cooperation.
So Donald Trump is the man to hold their feet to the fire. I mean, he's likely to speak his mind, is he not? Is that not a good thing?
In my opinion, no. I think Donald Trump is going to go in there and he's going to say something outrageous. The president is just not characterologically. I think he's just not ready for this, to be perfectly honest. We know that the president doesn't read. We know that the president doesn't know a great deal about East Asia. We know that the president has already talked about gambling away U.S. forces in South Korea for pressure on trade talks with the South Koreans. I'm actually very much afraid. I've been arguing against this for a week in the media. I think it's actually a really bad idea that the president meet the leader of North Korea.
Okay, let's go to D.C., Washington, D.C. Julian there. Are people warning President Trump that perhaps this is a bridge too far, that he's not qualified for it, and it's a bit of a dangerous mission?
Yes, but the question is whether those people are in the room. I mean, here in D.C., you have a president who clearly feels that he's got the hang of this whole presidency thing, and that he can sort of fly solo in a way. He just got rid of his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and everything we hear from inside the White House is that he thinks that his gut instincts trump, so to speak, the so-called expert advice. He announced the move of the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Everyone told him that it would cause a conflagration in the Middle East, and it didn't. He feels in this situation that his policy of maximum pressure has forced the North Koreans to the table, and so he has Kim Jong-un over a barrel. The risk is, of course, that if Kim Jong-un doesn't see things that way, Trump may go in there and be sorely disappointed. And then the unknown is, how does he react to disappointment and what you do after a summit?
All right, it's not a laughing matter, but the idea of it actually sort of brings a smile to my face, and the news is never dull. But Lindsay, we had feet to the fire, over a barrel. This is the position that perhaps Trump thinks he's got with the North Koreans. It is a position of strength to some extent, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, we have to remember, Donald Trump is not ideologically a foreign policy hawk along the lines of, say, George W. Bush's administration. His is America First foreign policy, which has really been dominated by this issue of trade nationalism, trade protectionism. This gives him flexibility in his negotiating stance. He's going to see that his tough tweet, tough sanction approach is working, and it's brought him to this point of perhaps meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Do you think the world or the United States would be in this position if it were not for Donald Trump being Donald Trump?
Well, counterfactuals are always difficult to play with, but we know that over the fall there was quite a lot of brinksmanship that was coming along, and that this meeting has been proposed, and Donald Trump has shown that he's open to it.
Okay, if it happens, and we'll talk about whether it's going to happen towards the end of the program, but Jim, you've spent time with the North Koreans. Tricky dealing with them?
They're tough. They're very tough. They're good negotiators. As are the South Koreans and the Chinese, for that matter. Mr. Trump will not, I think, go down terribly well if he goes breezing in, assuming that everything's going to fall into his lap, because it won't. They don't negotiate like that.
So does he have to be tactful?
He has to be many things, I think, that he's not, and tactful is one of them. He's got to be well briefed, because they're well briefed. They know their stuff. He'll be dealing with people who've been dealing with the United States and issues involving the United States for the whole of their careers. These aren't amateurs. These aren't people who just sort of come in off the street.
And you know the chap who's now their foreign minister.
I do, indeed. He was the ambassador, the first ambassador in London. He came to dinner at our house. He came to my 70th birthday party. No, sorry, it was his successor. Mr. E is a very pleasant man to deal with socially, but he's tough, as most North Koreans are. That he will know his stuff. He was part of the six-party talks earlier on. So he's... These
were the ones going back for a period of time when the nuclear program was halted before it was started up again.
Well, this was the successor to the agreed framework. The agreed framework of 1994 ended in 2002. We could argue about who ended it. It was probably the Bush administration, but the North Koreans added fire to the flames. That was replaced at US and Chinese prompting, in a way, by the six-party talks, which ran from 2003 to roughly end of 2009, to the end of the Bush administration. The agreed framework capped the most dangerous North Korean nuclear program. The six-party talks had the same end. And by that time, of course, the program was much more dangerous because they'd actually started testing nuclear devices in from 2006 onwards.
If I may go back to South Korea, what is the most frightening thing from the South's point of view about what Donald Trump might do or might promise?
I think probably the biggest concern is that the president will be willing to put the alliance on the table in exchange for a very soft, weak T denuclearization commitment, what the Americans call CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament. The North Koreans almost certainly are not going to do that. As your previous guest suggested, the North Koreans sort of flim-flammed the last two rounds of talks. The Americans also didn't really play in fully good faith either. But it's highly unlikely that North Korea will give up nuclear weapons. They've spent 40 years developing these things. So if we give up USFK in exchange for that, the North Koreans are almost certainly going to cheat, and South Korean security will be worse. This is the big problem with putting Donald Trump in the room. He just doesn't understand these things. The president is very impulsive. He's very erratic. He's moody. He's prone to fly off script. He's going to go in there and he's going to sort of gamble away something, and he's not going to get much back. He's already given up a summit with North Korea, which is in itself a huge carrot, meeting the American president when you're the leader of a tin-pocket dictatorship like North Korea, and he got nothing for it. I mean, he gave up the prestige of meeting the American president for nothing. I don't know why anybody thinks he's going to go in there and carve out a good deal. He hasn't been able to do that previously.
Julian, I'm reminded of back in 1986, I think it was, Reykjavik summit, Reagan-Gorbachev, when the supposed leader of the free world said, hang on, you know, if you give up your nukes, we'll give up our nukes. And the world went, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think, though, we're talking about very different people. We're talking about very different men. And as everyone around the table has pointed out, Donald Trump is very thin-skinned. He doesn't have, as far as we could tell, a comparable vision in terms of, you know, a nuclear-free world. You know, as great as the risk of giving up the South Korean alliance on a promise is the other side of that coin. If he doesn't get the denuclearization that he thinks North Korea are going to agree to, everything we know about him from the past, where he has been spurned, where he has been snubbed, he reacts very aggressively, at least on Twitter. Question is, how is he going to react in the real world? And you know, your other guest pointed out that he is essentially a American first sort of defensive realist, but he's a very fluid character as well. And I think what we're looking for now is, for example, if he replaces his current national security advisor with John Bolton, we're looking at a very different world, because that will be a signal ahead of these talks that he intends to go in there in a very aggressive way, because John Bolton has been a consistent advocate of bombing North Korea.
Well, I'll come to you in just a moment. I was going to talk to you, Lindsay, in just a second. But in terms of the nature of this, would North Korea be a frightened country if John Bolton took over as National Security Advisor? I mean, he's not known for stepping back, is he?
He's not known for stepping back. As in his previous roles, he was pretty anti-North Korea. And as the Guardian correspondent has just said, he is a current advocate, or has been a current advocate.
Would that worry North Korea?
I think it would worry North Korea. I think the reason the North Koreans have come to the table is there's not just one reason. There's a mixture. But I think part of it is concern that last year things looked as though they might get out of hand. Now, on the Korean Peninsula, there's always been a crisis since 1953. Some of them were very serious. I was in Seoul when the cabinet was blown up by the North Koreans in Rangoon. I was in Seoul just after the 1976 axe murders of 2 Americans at Panmunjom. But all through that, there was a mechanism that brought each party back from the brink. Last year, it began to look as though that mechanism wasn't working, particularly. I mean, the United States has generally in the past been a power that has said, don't go so far, don't push things. When the cabinet was blown up, it was the American military commander and the American ambassador in Seoul who were pressing for a gentle approach. Don't do it, don't go, because it's too dangerous. Okay. There's another problem in all this.
You can tell me about that in just a moment. But Lindsay, you wanted to jump in, then I've got a question for you.
Certainly. I mean, there are personnel issues from the U.S. side. Joseph Yoon retired last month, so the question of who is going to accompany Donald Trump, be in the room when if that meeting were to go through, is out there. But what I'm hearing is this is a matter of expectations. And if we set the expectation that it's denuclearization or bust, that just understates the historic nature of this potential meeting. Should Trump sit down with Kim Jong-un, it would be the first time a sitting U.S. president had met with an incumbent North Korean leader. That makes it very difficult.
It's a bit like Chamberlain and Hitler, perhaps.
That makes it very difficult.
You know, it's better for the person who is being vilified worldwide to meet with the supposed leader of the free world. I know Chamberlain wasn't, but I mean, what does Trump have to get out of this? What does he want out of it? He's not going to get denuclearization.
Well, the expectation has to be set around what comes next. So further meetings, further efforts to actually have back-channel discussions and lower-level delegations where they're able to set additional meetings, the preconditions that North Korea has agreed to, potentially no missile tests in the near future, or no provocation in response to any U.S. South Korean exercises, you know, that those would stay in place in the foreseeable future as additional rounds of negotiations continue.
Okay, let's go to South Korea. Robert, what's it going to take for this meeting to happen?
Well, they need to find a locale. That's going to be trouble. Kim Jong-un probably won't leave the country. Other than that, I think it's it will probably happen just because the president wants it, right? I mean, the president has a great deal of foreign policy authority. The North Koreans desperately want this, right? The idea of the North Korean leader meeting the American president as equals is going to be a huge propaganda coup for the North Koreans. They'll push this thing through no matter what. The real question is whether or not the Americans come prepared and have some kind of deal in mind, because the North Koreans aren't going to give us denuclearization. So what are we going to accept and what are we going to give away? And right now, the North Koreans haven't put any meaningful carrot on the table. You know, family reunions and going to the Olympics, that's fluff. That's not real. And we don't really know what the Americans are willing to gamble away either, although Donald Trump has given speeches talking about, you know, removing troops and sort of pushing the South Koreans on the trade deal. I mean, this is all moving so fast. You know, a lot of people worked in these issues for a really, really long time. None of these people were consulted, right? This is just roaring past the analyst and diplomatic community. The president's just dumping right in with both feet. I don't understand why people think this is going to work. I mean, there'll be a bunch of nice photographs, and maybe it'll be a bust at best. At worst, it could be Trump and Kim yelling at each other the way they were last year over Twitter. This is not going to be fixed in 9 weeks. The last time we came close to a summit, when Bill Clinton almost went to Pyongyang in 2000, it took 6 years of effort to get there. And then someone like Donald Trump with his character is going to put all this together in 9 weeks? No.
Not possible, Julian. That's the feeling from the Korean Peninsula. What do you say?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that the chances of a positive outcome are low. The chances of it actually happening are probably just above 50-50 because, you know, both sides are experienced in brinksmanship, and if they feel that the other side has invested a lot in this meeting and had this meeting taking place, then we may see last-minute demands or last-minute conditionality. Or public statements that leads the other side to draw back. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at all that this is actually going to happen. But I agree, probably will happen because both individuals here see it as in their interest.
Okay, so 50-50. Let's say it does happen and Donald Trump gets wherever it is, although Robert's suggesting that Kim Jong-un won't even leave the country. But they meet. Let's say they meet. What would be a win for Donald Trump if the North won't give up its nukes?
Well, obviously,
sorry, on this occasion, Robert, I'll come back to you.
Okay, well, I would say agreement to suspend missile and nuclear tests. I mean, that would obviously be a big win and a big give. The question is, what would Donald Trump give in return? And that is the question mark here.
Okay, Lindsay, what would Donald Trump want in return?
Donald Trump wants to have, I mean, it's difficult to speculate, but Donald Trump wants to get to the negotiation table with Kim Jong-un at the highest level. This is flipping the diplomatic script. Usually we see lower level back channel negotiators, think about the Iran deal, years and years of negotiation, and only towards the end do the heads of state meet. This is flipping it so that two heads of state have hypothetically agreed to open a dialogue on a very significant policy issue. The idea there that they can get into the room, and in fact, we won't know if they're going to get into the room until we see them in the room, right? That is the objective.
Can you imagine what it would be like in the room?
No. I mean, that would be something.
They'd be trying to outdo each other with the haircuts.
I can hear Donald
Yeah,
Trump.
Robert.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can imagine what it would be like in the room. I can see Donald Trump bored out of his mind, rolling his eyes, wondering what he's doing there, listening to these details about missile totals and whatnot, and then asking Kim Jong-un if he's also got gold-plated bathrooms in his palaces. Again, I don't understand why people think these two leaders, both of them are arrogant, both of them are secluded, both of them live inside information bubbles, yet suddenly we expect these two leaders, without much preparation and only 9 weeks to come in and negotiate major strategic issues. I'm just blown away that people expect this, especially on the American side. I agree with your other guests who said the North Koreans will come prepared. Their people will be ready. But you don't even have a relevant staff on the American side to do this. There's no ambassador in South Korea. There's no undersecretary for East Asian affairs. There's not a secretary of state. Very soon there may not be a national security advisor, right? When the South Korean foreign minister went to Washington the last couple of days, she met Ivanka Trump because Rex Tillerson had been fired. I mean, the Americans are not ready for this.
But George or not war.
Yeah, sure, fine. But how can we have to do that at the presidential level, which is a major give? A summit's a major give to the North Koreans. What the North Koreans really, really want is to have their leader meet the American president one-on-one. Why not have this happen at a lower level? That's what we did in six-party talks and greed framework. This never got near in the past to presidential level. Well, it did with
because it hasn't been working.
But there are a lot of other steps you could go through.
And the point Lindsay's making is that, this new approach is a new approach, and what's happened in the past hasn't worked.
Well, it isn't all that new.
And Donald Trump is qualified to do that.
Okay, let's let Jim jump in.
There are huge risks of that. Talking about imagining them in the room, the one thing that Donald Trump hates is to be lectured. One thing we know is Kim Jong-un will make a big speech outlining the crimes of the U.S. And the one thing Kim Jong-un hates and the whole regime hates is a personal insult directed at the leader. And we can be pretty sure somewhere along the line that Trump is going to come out with a personal insult. So the risks and likelihood.
And the risks, what's at stake here?
Well, the risk is that we're back to something like last year, but with...
no, the risks are greater than that, aren't they? Two people who've been openly insulting each other agree to talk, and everybody's worried that what they're going to say to each other is going to inflame the situation.
Yeah, well, I think that must always be the case. I mean, Lindsay's mentioned that the underlings who do all the work. Yes, of course they do all the work. I don't know of no major meeting where it's just been the two leaders. Even with Reagan and Gorbachev, there had been a lot of work beforehand. We almost got
But they looked each other in the eye, or at least Reagan looked at Gorbachev and said, here's a man I can do business with. I tell you what, I'm going to make you this offer. And he caught everybody by surprise. Yes,
I don't somehow see that working in the context of Mr. Kim Jong-un. I think, I agree that he will get a lot of domestic prestige out of meeting the American president. His father nearly got there with Clinton. If things hadn't gone difficult here over the Middle East, Clinton would probably have gone to Pyongyang in 2001.
Let's ask Lindsay, do you think it's going to happen?
I do. I mean, it's speculative, and I wouldn't want to speculate, but we've seen over the last few weeks representatives from South Korea, North Korea, U.S. meet in Europe. We've seen Trump reiterate his intention to meet with Kim Jong-un. We've heard reporting yesterday from the South Koreans that Kim Jong-un has said he's committed to denuclearization. These are steps that we are seeing that are indicators that it is moving forward. Further indicators could be any response to the decision to restart the exercises on April 1st. Any decision taken on those 3 detainees in North Korea to be released.
Okay. Just a quick word from South Korea. Peace is the prospect, Robert.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could get to some kind of deal. I'm not opposed to talks in principle. If we're any other American president, someone who's better prepared and more stable and more balanced and had a staff for this, I'd be in support of it. It'd been a process and a train that led to this. But Donald Trump made this impulsively. He likes to be on television, likes attention. You know, he's facing scandals at home. I'm not convinced at all that the president's actual, you know, his mind is focused on this. I mean, if you look at his Twitter feed, he's more vested in his vendettas and whatnot. Again, I just don't understand why anybody thinks Donald Trump is going to walk into this ready to go point to point with someone like Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, OK, I think you've made your point very clear. We appreciate your time from Busan in South Korea, from Washington, D.C. Julian, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming to the round table. We will invite you back if and when it happens and if and when you are still living where you're living. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, thank you very much for watching. We hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye for now.